Now, in a Stones connection, they had a deep connection with Prince Bernhard of the Netherlands. There's even rumors that some of their albums were recorded on his premises or under his patronage. And in the Wikipedia online encyclopedia, it says that Marianne Faithfull's father, and again, here we go, dig deep and you'll find some interesting things. Her father, Major Dr. Robert Glynn Faithfull, was a British military officer and college professor in psychology. Her mother, Eva von Sacher-Masoch, Baroness Ariso, was originally from Vienna. Royalty, military, right? With aristocratic roots in the Habsburg dynasty and Jewish ancestry of her maternal side. Faithfull's maternal great-uncle was Leopold von Sacher-Masoch, the 19th century Austrian nobleman whose erotic novel Venus in Furs spawned the word masochism. Wonderful lineage. Great family to have. By the way, there's often one of the terms that's used for this Dionysian cult is delta of Venus, being the inverted triangle. You see, there's all these terms that they also use. So whenever you see the term Venus, you know, check it out, see if there's any associations that jump up. But many of the pop icons are born to elites, but raised in unofficial families. See, they may be called Smith and Jones on the surface, Tom, Dick, and Harry, but who are they really born from? Who are they really related to? Well, many of the pop icons are born to elites, but raised in unofficial families, and then when the time is right, they're put before the world via the media as the rags to riches girl or boy next door. However, many have blood ties to royal dynasties. Some of them know this, others do not. And it'll be again through the symbolism of the movies and the videos that they're in that often this is pointed out. David Icke has spoken about this in The Biggest Secret. He says the groups have their own midwives who supervise the births, and they are also born in hospitals under the supervision of staff loyal to the Brotherhood and their satanic ritual offshoots. Other children from non-satanic families are taken away at birth, which is whistleblown in the movie Omen, by the way, if you watch the first Omen movie. Taken away at birth, and the parents are told their child has died when in fact they are taken away to be sacrificed or used in mind control projects. One of the locations that has come up time and time again in this is the Breasted Memorial Hospital, which is where? Hampton Court. Remember we showed the Hampton Court pictures when we looked at hierarchy? This is a hospital nearby in which the nurses commonly refer to these offspring as the bastard children of the royals. That this is the hospital where they go to be born, one of them. And in the grapevine, it's actually known to be so. So we have to ask questions. Who are these people? We see the people's champions, but we have to ask questions about not only who they are, where they came from, but what orgs do they belong to? You know, this has come out somewhat in more recent times, thank goodness, with the look at the Bush dynasty and so forth and so on. And that's good. It's very, very, very good. As I say, shine the light they claim to love back on them. But when we're talking about this, we have to understand that we accept the existence of these freaky cults, which appear in the headlines from time to time. You know, the Jim Jones sort of cults, and we just have to get around it. We have to accept it. In fact, right here in Sweden, you have your Queen Sylvia, stood up and said, this thing is getting worse. After being exposed to some of this stuff, she's on record to say, it must stop. And of course, the headlines are absolutely full of it all the time. One sort of silver lining, if you want to call it, is the fact that we're getting a handle on this. Maury Terry says that events, this is around the Son of Sam killings, he says events were manipulated behind the scenes by a handful of influential individuals who, although not directly involved in the shootings themselves, were compromised because they had interacted with cult leaders at high society drug parties that featured sex with children. Of course, we have as I said, the revelations of Kathy O'Brien and Arizona Wilder and Bryce Taylor and others. I mentioned earlier the great work of John DeCamp, who exposed this pedophilia on a very, very high level, going all the way into even the intelligence community. I believe that this was very much whistleblown in the movie Manchurian Candidate, which involves insights into mind control. And those who have actually studied mind control and the works of this creature, Dr. Cameron, And also of Dr. Jose Delgado, you see, will know what I'm talking about. And of course the great books to mention there are the works of Jim Keith. But these organizations are run from Britain, basically, the British establishment. One particular group that's important is the Tavistock Institute. They're behind a lot of these programs like Project Monarch and MK Ultra. Royal funded, you see. And as I said, we have groups that we should write down, take note of, study. The Club of the Isles, the Pilgrim Society, the Cliveden Set, the Mount Perilyn Society, the Alpha Lodges of Freemasonry. These are descendants. All these groups I'm mentioning are descendants of the Templars. Because child abuse and child abduction started in the 13th century, if not before, up in Scotland. Scotland was one of the places where it started. And who runs Scotland? Anyone who knows anything about the history of Scotland knows it's one of the most important Templar bastions. So when you're studying these lunar societies and hellfire clubs, realize these are just later branches under different guise of some very, very ancient Freemasonic organizations, very high level. And when you talk about the Alpha Lodges of Freemasonry, that's important because that ties into the famous Jack the Ripper case. It's the Alpha Lodge of Freemasonry in England that was behind it. And the truth about that came actually from the memoirs of one man. The famous Victorian artist William Sickert, who was deeply aware of who the real proponents and perpetrators of the Ripper were. And he was a renowned artist. You can look him up on the web. And all his life he kept the secret. And his close friend was Inspector Aberline, who actually was in charge of the case. And later on, actually just before his retirement, and he actually retired in disgust because later on he went to solve this, what's called the, again involving very high level pedophile elites. I mean very, very high level. And he got nowhere in that, so he basically ended up retiring. And both these gentlemen kept the memoirs and knew firsthand. I mean, the murdered girls were known to Walter Sickert. And he finally, that's me in front of his house there in London, he finally confided the memoirs to his son, Joseph Sickert, who wrote this book, The Ripper and the Royals, bringing out the true details about the Ripper killings and connecting it to these very powerful lodges of Freemasonry. So I highly recommend that book as well. And of course it circulated around, particularly Albert Victor, Duke of Clarence and Avondale. I'm not indicting him specifically. He was as much a victim. He was deaf. He was introverted. He was not the prime mover, even though the whole crime was to cover up his indiscretions. But he suffered terribly under these people who moved to cover up his indiscretions, you see. And of course Prince Albert was the brother, here he's seen with Prince George, who later on went on to become the King of England, King George. Very, very high ups. Members of the Saxe-Coburg-Gotha dynasty. Very, very, very high up the ladder of the power pyramid. And Sickert, of course, beautifully points out that this was nothing to do with a lone assassin idea, which still the media purvey, this ludicrous notion. The prime mover, by the way, and the head of the Alpha Lodge at the time that this was taking place was a man, to use that word in its broadest context, Lord Randolph Churchill, who is the father of, guess who? Winston Churchill. He was the mastermind who set the wheels moving. Very, very high level Freemasons. Here, by the way, is Winston Churchill being initiated into the Albion Lodge of Druids in 1908. And this Druid tie-in is quite important for those who follow my work. We're not talking true Druidism, of course, we're talking the faux version, the sun cult, solar cult stuff that came later on, but nevertheless. And Winston Churchill and his fathers were members of the Spencer family, like Lady Spencer, who was again ritually murdered. You see, so they have these connections. Their ancestor, though, was Lord Marlborough, a very high level elite.